I really did not want to buy a shipping container. I could not afford that in my budget. Like, I knew if I was buying the shipping container, the vacation rental was not going to happen. Hi, I'm Dana, and last year I moved to the desert to build an off-grid homestead, and I failed. If you haven't seen part one of my story, it's probably best to go back and watch that. It could answer any questions that you might have before you continue on with this video. When I left off in part one, I was road tripping from South Carolina to New Mexico, and I just picked up one of my best friends in Knoxville, Tennessee. We drove the rest of that day till just past Nashville, and we found a really cheap hotel for the night. The next morning was the first of a series of letdowns. At this hotel, we brought the solar cooler in and we unloaded the food into the refrigerator. I plugged the solar cooler into charge for the night because I wasn't sure how long the battery lasted. And the next morning, even though the cooler had been plugged in all night, it was completely dead. This realization that the solar cooler was dead was just the first of many letdowns to come. I didn't know it at the time, but it was definitely foreshadowing. I literally used it one day and now it was dead. The solar cooler that I had bought was one that you can plug into a solar panel, or like what I purchased with it, a solar table, in order to charge it, or you can plug it into your car, you can plug it into a standard outlet. I wondered if maybe my cooler wasn't dead, but that the outlet in the hotel wasn't working. It was a super cheap hotel, so I wasn't super worried, but I was a little concerned. I was just really thankful that we had put all of our food into the refrigerator for the night, so when we put that back in the cooler for the day, it was already cold and kind of helped keep it cool until we got to the next hotel that night. And at this next hotel is when I checked the outlets to make sure they worked and then plugged the cooler in. And thankfully this hotel also had a refrigerator that we could put the food back into. Of course, though, the next morning when we woke up, the cooler still was not charged and not working, and it was totally warm. And for the rest of the road trip, I lugged that heavy cooler from the car into every hotel room, plugging it in, trying to figure out how to get it to work, and it never came back to life. On September 4th, 2023, we rolled into Albuquerque, New Mexico. I really thought that the drive was going to take a lot longer, but with my friend Kendra there with me, she could take over driving for part of the day and we could get so much further. I was pretty beat when we arrived, even though it wasn't a super long road trip, because I battle histamine issues and MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome. If you haven't heard of it, it's basically your body is allergic to stress. That's a good way to describe it. So little things can set it off, and stress is more than just emotions or mental stress. Huge stressors for me are environmental, like perfumes, cigarette smoke, food, which I have a lot of food sensitivities, so trying to dodge all of those while traveling and not being able to really cook a meal is super challenging. But also not getting enough sleep is stressful for my body, so sleeping in different places, or some of these hotels were moldy, and mold is really huge for affecting MCAS. A lot of people's MCAS is actually triggered from living in a moldy environment. And something people may be more familiar with is long COVID. And that is, I think, basically MCAS, if not super similar. So that can give you an idea of what someone like me is experiencing on a daily basis, even though I had this long before the pandemic. We were thankfully staying at a friend of Kendra's, who's a friend of mine now, Karina's house. She's super sweet, and she totally let us crash out in her office. It was so nice of her. I was able to unload a lot from my car. I was able to bring that cooler in and try to plug it in again to see if it would work. I didn't realize it at the time, but Albuquerque has like a really high crime rate, and it seemed to me from all the signs that I saw there and all of the talk from people that you should never leave anything in your car, that people will break into it. And that was very concerning for me because I had all of this equipment that was vital to my existence in my car. We were able to unload some of it into Karina's, thankfully, but some of it was still in my car. So I had kind of a system I had already created before I got there to hide what was in my car, since we were staying in hotels every night all across the country, and you never know who's in the parking lot looking around while you're sleeping. So I had purchased like a black tarp for the back of my car to put over everything, just because I knew that my car would basically be left alone at night. So if it's dark in there, it can be hard to see if anything's in there. So black tarp over everything in the back. And when I say car, I mean SUV. I don't know why it's weird for me to say SUV all the time. So I just say car. And then in the front, I bought a sunshade that is like the silver reflective on one side and it's black on the other. And so I'd put the black part facing out at night. And then I had basically like screens for the windows. They're mostly like if you want to roll down the window, not have bugs come in, but they can still block visually, especially at night, what people are able to see inside your car. And then for my steering wheel, I had one of those locks that you put on the steering wheel. I just bought it through Amazon, steering wheel lock. I don't know what else they're called. And I was just hoping that if people did look in, they would see that and at least realize, okay, well, the steering wheel's locked and everything else looks dark. So hopefully they would just move on. And I got really lucky. My car did not get broken into one time and I had so much stuff in there most of the time. Editing Dana here. I forgot to mention that we unloaded stuff from my car that day as much as we really could. And then Kendra and I that afternoon drove down to my property to check it out for the first time. I bought this land sight unseen, which I know you're not supposed to do. Everything I saw online said never do that, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. I didn't have the money or the time to fly out there and inspect it and check it every season and on, like all the recommendations say, which are smart recommendations, but we're not always functioning under a time frame or monetarily that allows for it. I didn't even know if the roads were drivable. I had an idea that they were from monitoring that Facebook group and seeing people driving way smaller cars than me and them saying they're able to easily drive to their property even in wintertime. That gave me a good hint that I should be able to drive to my property in my vehicle without issue. And thankfully that was true. We got to my property just fine. The roads were great. They're dirt, but they were great. At first, it wasn't so good because they are like graded. I'm probably not using the right term, but basically they have lines carved along them. And for me, like I'm used to dirt roads where you need to drive slow on a dirt road and people will get upset if you don't drive slowly on a dirt road. But when they're graded like that, I learned pretty quickly that you need to pick up your pace a bit. Otherwise, you're going to shake the brains out of your head. I was a little nervous because we turned off from the highway onto the dirt road that leads to my property, and it was shaking us, I was driving so slow, it was shaking us so crazy. I was like, how am I going to drive there all the time? Like, how am I going to get to my property? I feel like I'm going to get whiplash. And so I just decided to experiment and go a little faster. And then it was like smooth sailing. And I'm like, okay, just don't drive slow if the road is graded or whatever the term for it actually is. The property, when we got there, it was just so beautiful. I got out of my car and the air was peaceful. It was a sunny day. It was just absolutely gorgeous. I was just completely overcome with like the reality of it all. It was so exciting. I was standing on a piece of land that I actually owned. Like I would like pick up a rock and be like, I own this rock. Like this is my rock because I own this land. This is so cool. And when I was looking across my property, I felt like I could see all of the buildings that I wanted to build, all of the structures. Like I could see the whole thing in my mind's eye overlaid over the land, and it made me so excited. And then I got a call from my mover. Even though the predicted delivery date for my stuff was still an entire week away, like I'm saying 7+ days away, my stuff was already in New Mexico and they were wanting to deliver. I let them know that I needed a few days to build my garages because I had nowhere for the stuff to go. They thankfully said that was just fine. So I went from thinking I had a whole entire week to build these garages, to store literally everything that I own, to having 3 days to do it. Editing Dana again. So we left the property right then and there and drove straight to Harbor Freight and bought 2 10-foot by 10-foot portable garages. So my original plan had been to get the 20-foot long portable garage from Harbor Freight and then line it with aluminum siding, just like they did on Tiny Shiny Home. I'll try to put a link below for their video, But when I talked to the people at Harbor Freight, they said like, yeah, there's no way you can haul that garage, that portable garage, with an SUV. You have to have some kind of bigger vehicle. I already knew this before getting to New Mexico, so I just planned on buying the sheds, and I don't know why, but I thought I could haul the aluminum on my SUV as well. So I bought the sheds and then realized I couldn't haul the aluminum. So I went down and built the sheds. And then I was realizing later that I was renting this truck to haul the aluminum. I could have just waited and gotten the larger garage, I think. I think it would have fit in my U-Haul rental. I'm not totally sure though. I just wish I'd had more time, because then I could have had more time to actually think about it and go, what really is the best plan? And maybe it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because as you'll find out, the weather on my property is absolute insanity. Anyway, on Tiny Shiny Home, they built out the frame for the 20-foot garage, and then they built a hyper adobe wall for the back wall, and then they did wood for the front wall, and then obviously the rest was aluminum. So I love that plan, but I could not build hyper adobe yet, so I didn't have my equipment. I needed it to get delivered, and I needed the garage in order to get the delivery for it. So anyway, I just decided like I'm gonna build these smaller garages, and I'll use wood on the front and back, aluminum on the rest, and that was what I was rolling with. So we went down there, we built out the 2 frames, high-fived, called it a day, got up the next morning, got the U-Haul, got to Home Depot, loaded up all my aluminum, all of my screws that I needed. I even bought like some new drill bits just in case, which I'm glad I did, and got back down to the property. The frames were actually doing okay because there's really not a lot of surface area on those poles, the framing for the garages. There wasn't much for the wind to pick up. We got the aluminum unloaded and we got to work. It was really exciting. I got my new drill bit put in my drill, and I'm trying to drill through the aluminum into the poles so I can have a guide hole for my screws, and my bits kept breaking. And what I didn't realize is, so I had a drill already, and then I bought another one because I just wanted to have 2 just in case something went wrong. And I knew I had my friend there, so she might be needing to use one of them, and it's just kind of always good to have a couple drills. And I was using the new one, and I didn't realize that the new one had like an extra lock feature that my old drill does not have. So I'm putting the bits in thinking I'm locking them in, and then they're wobbling. And obviously the vibration and not being solidly in place was causing them to break. And I could not figure out why this freaking drill was not locking. And it wasn't till much later I was like, there's an extra turn I have to do after getting it in place that for some reason wasn't working just when I was trying to put the bit in out there. So that was really frustrating. I was trying to get the guide holes drilled and I was just breaking bits left and right. It's just one of those things that if I had just picked up my old drill to start that project, that wouldn't have happened. And I could have saved a ton of money and time, because obviously the drill bits would be broken and then I'd be having to go to Home Depot to buy new bits. The Home Depot is an hour away one way. So not counting the time in Home Depot, that's 2 hours out of every day just trying to go pick up more freaking drill bits to get these darn garages going. So anyway, I was just moving forward, just trying to get this aluminum up on these garages, panel by panel, screwing them in, and then getting as much as I could get done that day, going back up to Albuquerque to crash out for the night, get up early the next day to come back down there, only to find the garages just mangled. Absolutely mangled and strewn across the desert floor. I had been hoping that adding the aluminum panels to the garages would make them heavier and easier to stay put, but instead it just created more surface area for the wind to just grab a hold of them and crush them like they're an old tissue. They just absolutely were destroyed every time. And it's so funny because when I was first driving to my property that first day, I was passing all these other properties where people just had so much junk on them, and I was thinking why do you buy a beautiful piece of land in a beautiful place and then just put garbage on it, and I thought I'm not doing that to my land. I want to take care of my land. I want it to be beautiful. And literally the first thing that I had on my land was a junk pile, because you have amazingly good intentions and the weather out there has an entirely different plan for you. And before you know it, all of your stuff is mangled and in a pile. So every day I'd get up, I'd go down there, grab whatever mangled mess that the wind had created out of my garages, drag them back to my property, try to piece them back together, try to get a little more done. I even tried like digging holes for footing and putting Quikrete in, trying to concrete down the poles for the framing. Nothing worked. And this whole time I'm hearing from my mover, they're calling me a bunch, and I'm like, please, I just need a little bit more time. It was super stressful after 6 days of this, of battling the elements down there, just trying to get 2 tiny garages built. I decided to cave and just go with the plan B that I had for that situation. I had debated about just renting another U-Haul, trying to get that 20-foot garage, and wondering how many days would I battle with that and not be able to get it put up, because I didn't have a hyper adobe wall to stabilize it, no matter what size. So I went with the plan B, which was to buy a shipping container. I really did not want to buy a shipping container. I could not afford that in my budget. Like, I knew if I was buying the shipping container, the vacation rental was not going to happen until I figured out some other way to make money to build it, because that was my vacation rental build money, basically. It was a really hard choice, but I had to do it because I had to have my stuff delivered. I didn't want to be charged more by my mover, and there was no guarantee that any garage I would try to put together would actually survive. So like with a lot of decisions I made during this adventure, it was half relief and half just like crushing sadness, because, you know, it only would kind of solve a problem, but create more. It was hard, but at least I had the money to do that. I was so thankful. I thought, what if I didn't have any money to buy a shipping container? Like, what if this was just like the one plan, the garages, and I didn't have anything else? So I spent about $3,000 trying to get those garages put together. I spent $6,200 on the shipping container. I could have just been out that $6,200 if I had just went with the shipping container and had it handled right away and not been running around. I was really hoping to save that money though, and instead now I was out almost $10,000. So this was not a good start. I wasn't even living on my land yet, and I was already out $10,000, and I didn't even have my stuff there. I tried to put the financial loss out of my mind. I decided, I'm gonna go with what I had planned if I did have a financial hit like that, which is get my home base together, and then get Starlink and continue doing the contract work I was doing and look for remote jobs. I'd have my solar power generator to run my router from Starlink, and I could work all winter when I couldn't build anyway and try to put together even maybe a team of helpers for spring and summer once the weather was warmer and we could actually build. I was pretty bummed that it seemed like, I wasn't going to be able to do any of the domes before winter, but I was happy that it still was very plausible that they were going to get built, even if it wasn't as quickly as I was hoping for. I had other money set aside for the build, but this was a huge chunk of it. This was pretty big. It wasn't half, but it was pretty close to half of what I had saved to build those vacation rentals. The shipping container was a little bit stressful for delivery. Something to know that if you buy a shipping container, at least from the company I purchased it from, is when they're trying to deliver it and they have to go onto the dirt roads, if they get stuck, it is on you, the buyer, to get a tow truck out there and pay for the cost of that in order to get their trucks to and from your property. So I was pretty worried because it had been really dry since I got there, but after I purchased my shipping container, this huge storm came in and it drenched all the roads, and I didn't know if the roads were even drivable, and I didn't know if the truck, even if maybe a car could drive on the roads, could a large truck delivering a huge shipping container be able to make it through? So I was sweating buckets on that one. I felt like I had just solved the problem of getting the shipping container, and I was so excited, and I had the movers lined up for the delivery date now, and things were moving forward, and then all of a sudden this big storm moved in, and I was like, oh no, how much more money could it cost if I have to pay for a tow truck to get the truck hauling my shipping container out of here? Thankfully, the morning of the delivery, things had started to dry up and the roads were great. They delivered my shipping container just fine. It was a lot of worry for nothing, but sometimes I feel like I can't turn the worry off if it's a big money ticket thing. It'll just worry me. The movers then showed up like the next day with my cubes. I got them unloaded and ready to go back to the mover. The shipping container was packed to the brim with my stuff. I mean, it was packed full to the point where some things I had to just take rope and tie them to the outside of the shipping container because they would not fit inside. But with that huge step handled, I can now start to focus on actually building on the property, the living spaces. And my plan was to build 2 small, basically sheds. One that I would live in, the other would basically serve as a bathroom and a place for me to hang my laundry, do my laundry, especially in the winter time when I couldn't do that outside. And my goal was just to get those finished before winter, so I had somewhere to hunker down in all winter. I was also really excited to get like the first one done and be able to like move my bed out of the shipping container because that would free up space and I would get to sleep in a bed again. So with my stuff there, Kendra and I moved down to the property. We got some shovels and got to digging a rubble trench. It not only creates a solid foundation, but it creates drainage. And even though I was living in the desert, there's still a monsoon season there. So I wanted water to be able to drain away from my buildings as much as possible and hopefully never get flooded out. We cranked up the battery-powered radio and we got to digging every day. If you want to be sure to catch more of my story, please hit like and subscribe. That really helps me and it lets me know that this is something interesting to you. And if you're feeling especially generous, there's a link in the description box below where you can help support me in different ways, like buying yourself a cool TV screensaver, picking up one of my element pillows, grabbing a roll of wallpaper or some fabric that I've designed, or treating yourself to a UFO ugly Christmas sweater. In the next video, I'll talk about how the build went with the tiny home sheds. I'll also give you guys a play-by-play of just what the schedule looked like on my property each day with the build. When I was getting up, when I was eating, when I was running errands, like what the average day looked like for me trying to be out there building on my property. I'll also go in more detail about my dead solar cooler and more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.